I swear I thought I was losing my mind that morning. I'd been dragging myself through work like a zombie, pretending everything was fine when my stomach kept twisting in knots. At first, I blamed it on stress. God knows the last year had been nothing but stress, with every failed test and every month of disappointment. But when the dizziness hit me so hard I had to grip my desk, I knew something was off. My coworkers asked if I needed water, but my hands were shaking too much to answer. I finally told my supervisor I needed to leave early, even though the guilt was eating me alive. The drive to the hospital felt endless, like the road was stretching on just to mess with me. I kept replaying the last 12 months inside my head. All the doctor appointments, all the maybe next month, all the nights I cried quietly so he wouldn't hear me. He always said I was overthinking everything, that I needed to relax, if I wanted my body to cooperate. Those words echoed in my ears as I sat in the waiting room, the smell of disinfectant burning my nose. I felt small, fragile, terrified something was really wrong with me this time. When the doctor walked back into the small exam room, holding the clipboard with that unreadable doctor face, my heart practically stopped. I braced myself for the worst, feeling my throat close up. He sat down, looked right at me, and said I was pregnant, 2 months along. For a second, I didn't even breathe. Then everything inside me cracked wide open, the tears, the disbelief, the relief so sharp it hurt. I covered my mouth, shaking, thinking this is it. This is real. For the first time in a year, I felt like life was finally giving me something back. I sat there for a long moment, letting the doctor's words sink in, feeling my heartbeat race so fast it almost hurt. I kept touching my stomach, not because anything had changed physically, but because suddenly it meant something. Someone was there. A tiny life I'd begged for in every prayer, every late-night whisper into the dark. I asked the doctor twice if he was sure, and he just smiled softly, saying the blood test was definitive. I laughed and cried at the same time, like a woman who'd finally been given oxygen after drowning. It felt unreal, almost too good to hold in my hands. Walking out of the hospital felt like floating. The air smelled sweeter, the colors looked brighter, even the traffic noise sounded like background music to the best day of my life. I kept imagining how I would tell him. Maybe I'd buy little baby socks, or maybe I'd put the ultrasound photo inside his favorite mug. I pictured him lifting me up, spinning me, telling me we finally did it. My heart squeezed just imagining the way he'd smile. For the first time in months, hope didn't feel dangerous. I got in the car and placed both hands on the steering wheel, but I couldn't start it right away. I was crying too hard. Happy tears, real happy tears, and wiping them with the back of my hand like some emotional mess. I kept saying, oh my God, over and over, half laughing. I wanted him to be the first person to know, the very first. So I pulled myself together, started the engine, and headed home with this warm secret inside me, ready to finally share joy instead of disappointment. The closer I got to our street, the more excited I became. I kept smoothing down my hair, checking my reflection in the rearview mirror, as if I needed to look a certain way to deliver the biggest news of our lives. My cheeks were flushed, my eyes still a little swollen from crying, but there was a glow there. Something I hadn't seen in myself in so long. I whispered to my belly again, promising that everything was going to be different now. That we were finally stepping into the life we dreamed about. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed his car already there. My heart skipped. Perfect. I wanted to tell him face to face, not over the phone like some rushed announcement. I grabbed my purse, steadied my breathing, and walked toward the front door, imagining how his expression would change when the words left my mouth. I didn't even think twice when I heard faint noises inside, muffled sounds coming from somewhere down the hall. I smiled, thinking maybe he was on a call or watching something. But as soon as I stepped in, something felt off. The house didn't sound right. It had a rhythm that didn't belong to us. A soft thump, a breathy laugh, something that made my skin prickle. I froze in place, my fingers tightening around my purse strap. That warm little bubble of joy inside me trembled. The sounds came again, louder this time, unmistakably intimate. And in that moment, standing in my own living room with the best news of my life still sitting on my tongue, I felt the air leave my lungs completely. I don't even remember how my legs carried me down that hallway. Every step felt like I was walking into a nightmare I hadn't signed up for. The closer I got, the clearer the sounds became. His voice, low and breathless, mixed with a woman's soft moans. My stomach twisted so violently I thought I'd collapse right there. I kept telling myself there had to be some explanation, something that made sense. But deep down, in that instinctive place we don't like to admit exists, I already knew. I think my heart broke before I even opened the door. When I finally pushed it open, the world didn't just shatter, it detonated. He was there, tangled with her on our bed, as if that room hadn't been a cemetery for our disappointments and whispered prayers for an entire year. They didn't even notice me at first. They were too wrapped up in each other. When he finally turned and saw me standing there, his face went white, then red, then something ugly in between. And instead of shame or shock or apology, the first thing he said was that I should have texted before coming home early, like I was interrupting a meeting. She scrambled off the bed, grabbing her clothes with this panicked gasp. But even in the chaos, I saw things that made my chest cave in further. Her necklace on my nightstand, an open wine bottle on the dresser, their clothes mixed together on the floor. This wasn't a one-time slip. This was practiced, familiar. I felt myself go completely silent, like my voice had been vacuumed right out of my lungs. And he kept talking, saying I was overreacting, that if I hadn't been so obsessed about getting pregnant, he wouldn't have felt so pushed away. I stood there, gripping the doorframe so hard my knuckles went numb, trying to hold myself upright as his words kept getting worse. He actually said I'd made the house unbearable with my sadness, as if the failed tests had been some kind of personal offense to him. He said he needed comfort, and she just happened to be there. Hearing him twist my pain into his excuse felt like being peeled open. He wasn't even trying to hide his irritation. He was treating the whole thing like an inconvenience he now had to manage. The other woman wouldn't even look at me. She kept her head down, face flushed, mumbling something about not knowing I'd be home. But the way she moved around the room, too comfortable, too familiar, told me everything. My chest felt tight, a burning pressure right behind my sternum, like my ribs were trying to crush my own heart. I wanted to scream, shout, throw something, but instead, I just shut down. Completely. The joy I'd been carrying from the hospital evaporated so fast it left me cold all over. He walked toward me, holding up his hands like I was the one being unreasonable. He said we could talk about this like adults, that I should calm down, because I was making a scene. A scene. In my own damn house. Something inside me snapped quietly, not a loud break, but a small internal click, like a lock turning in a door. I realized I couldn't tell him. Not now. Not like this. The pregnancy, the dream, the miracle I'd held close to my heart. It suddenly felt like something too pure to stain with his presence. I stepped back from him, feeling this strange calm spread through my body. Cold, steady, almost frightening in how controlled it felt. He kept asking why I wasn't saying anything, why I was just staring like that. But his voice sounded distant, muffled, like I was underwater. I didn't owe him a single word in that moment, not with the smell of another woman's perfume still hanging in the air of the bedroom where I'd once prayed for a family with him. So I just turned around and walked out, leaving him mid-sentence. He shouted after me, accusing me of walking away from the problem, saying that if I left now, it would only make things worse. Worse. As if anything could possibly be worse than the image of him on top of her burned into my brain. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I grabbed my keys with hands that weren't even trembling anymore and headed straight for the door. Behind me, I heard him telling her to wait in the room while he followed me, like she was some hidden accessory he could put back in a drawer. Outside, the air felt sharp and cold, even though it wasn't. I leaned against my car for a second, trying to breathe, trying to understand how joy and devastation could collide so violently in the span of 1 hour. My hand instinctively covered my stomach, and something inside me whispered that he didn't deserve this child. Not the news, not the hope, not the future tied to it. I slid into the driver's seat, shut the door, and let the silence swallow me whole. And in that heavy, suffocating quiet, I realized I had a decision to make, one that would change every piece of my life moving forward. I sat there in the car, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing holding me together. My breath came out in these short, shaky bursts, and for a moment I thought I might actually throw up. Not from morning sickness. This was heartbreak sickness, the kind that makes your whole body revolt. Tears blurred the windshield, but I didn't sob. It was quieter than that, almost hollow, like something inside me had snapped so cleanly it left only silence behind. And in that silence, memories began flooding in without mercy. I remembered the early days of our relationship, when he chased me like I was the only woman on earth who mattered. The way he'd show up at my door with takeout, the inside jokes, the promises whispered into my hair. I remembered the night we got married, how he'd held my hands during our vows, telling me we were in this together forever. And then came the first months of trying for a baby. How excited he pretended to be. How he said he couldn't wait to be a father. Every red flag I'd ignored suddenly lit up like fireworks inside my mind. Then the darker memories surfaced. The way he used to blame me for being too emotional after every negative test. How he insisted I should stop stressing if I wanted my body to cooperate. The nights he stayed out late and brushed it off by saying I was paranoid. God, I felt so stupid for believing him, for twisting myself into knots to keep our marriage afloat. Sitting there, with the weight of betrayal pressing down on me, it hit me. This baby wasn't a piece of him. This baby was a piece of me. My resilience, my fight, my miracle. And I needed to protect that at all costs. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my shirt, but more tears kept slipping out. Unstoppable. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was anger, raw and sharp, rising from a place inside me I didn't even know existed. I felt it tighten my throat, warm my cheeks, straighten my spine. For a year, I'd carried guilt like a stone strapped to my chest, thinking I was the one failing us. And there he was, betraying me in the cruelest way possible while I blamed myself for not giving him a baby. The irony tasted bitter on my tongue. Almost without thinking, I reached for my phone. My hands were steadier than I expected as I scrolled to a name I hadn't used in months. Marissa, my attorney friend. I stared at her contact photo for a long second, remembering the conversation we'd had before my wedding. She was the one who insisted on including the infidelity clause in the prenup, saying it was just smart, not cynical. Back then, I laughed and told her I'd never need it. And now here I was, breathing through the aftershocks of betrayal, pressing the call button with a strange sense of purpose. She picked up on the second ring, and the moment I heard her voice, warm, steady, familiar, I broke again. Not loud tears, just this trembling confession that I'd walked in on him with someone else. She didn't gasp or stutter. She went straight into calm, lawyer mode. She reminded me gently about the clause, about the protections I'd insisted on, just in case. Then she said something that rooted itself deep inside me. Alyssa, you don't owe him access to your future. Hearing those words, I felt something shift inside me. Not rage, not grief, but clarity. After hanging up with Marissa, I sat there quietly, letting her words settle like dust after an explosion. You don't owe him access to your future? The sentence looped in my head until it felt like a truth I'd always known but never dared to say aloud. I rested my hand on my stomach, and a protectiveness washed over me so fierce it nearly took my breath away. This baby was mine, my hope, my strength, my miracle. And I refused to let the man who broke me feel entitled to any part of it. Over the next few days, I moved through the house like a ghost, collecting evidence without him even noticing. Screenshots of messages, photos of his clothes mixed with hers, receipts from nights he claimed to be working late. I even managed to get him talking, subtly guiding the conversation until he admitted he'd been looking for comfort and that it had been going on a while. I recorded every word. Each piece of proof felt like a brick being laid in the foundation of my exit, strong, steady, unshakable. He tried multiple times to initiate these shallow conversations, acting confused about why I was acting distant, saying he wanted to fix things, if I'd put in the effort too. I just nodded or walked away, keeping my face unreadable. Inside, I was already gone. With every lie he told, every attempt to shift the blame onto me, my resolve hardened. I wasn't the woman begging to be loved anymore. I was the woman preparing her escape. And once everything was in place, I scheduled the meeting. Him, me, and the lawyer, who would end this marriage on my terms. I chose a neutral place for the meeting because I didn't want him in our house anymore, not even for an hour. A small conference room at Marissa's office felt perfect. Cold, bright, impersonal. The kind of place where emotions don't get to spill over and ruin the furniture. When he walked in, he actually smiled a little, like he thought this was some kind of reconciliation lunch. He even said he was glad I finally reached out, because he knew we could get past this if we both tried. Hearing him rewrite reality with that casual confidence made my skin crawl. He took a seat across from me and leaned forward, elbows on the table like he wanted to appear earnest. He said I'd been acting irrational since the incident, and that he hoped I was ready to talk like adults. I didn't answer. Instead, I watched the moment his smile slowly faded as Marissa walked in behind him, dropped a thick folder onto the table, and introduced herself as my attorney. He blinked fast, confused, then annoyed, like we'd interrupted some script he had rehearsed in his head where he got to be the reasonable one. Marissa didn't waste a second. She opened the folder and slid several pages toward him. The photos, the screenshots, the time-stamped recordings. Proof stacked in crisp, merciless black and white. He said it wasn't what it looked like, but his voice cracked halfway through the sentence, and he knew it was useless. Then he tried shifting tactics, saying I was overreacting, that we should focus on the marriage instead of petty revenge. Marissa calmly reminded him about the infidelity clause he'd agreed to in the prenup. Watching the color drain from his face was the first relief I'd felt in days. He tried everything after that, every manipulative trick in his book. He said we shouldn't throw the marriage away, that he'd been going through a rough time, that the other woman meant nothing. Each excuse hit the table like a wet rag, pathetic and heavy. Marissa stayed steady, explaining that the prenup left no wiggle room. His actions had activated every protection I had. The house, the accounts, the assets, everything shifted to me the moment he chose to betray our vows. Watching him realize he had no power left was almost surreal. Then came the anger. He slammed his hand on the table and said I was setting him up, as if I'd orchestrated his affair like a trap. He said I was cold, calculating, even vindictive. All in reported speech, his insults felt like echoes, not daggers. He kept insisting I was making a huge mistake, that I'd regret ruining his life over something fixable. But the more he talked, the more detached I felt. It was like watching a man unravel behind a glass wall, visible, audible, but no longer able to touch me. When Marissa slid the final signature page in front of him, he stared at it like it was poison. He said he refused to sign something so unfair, but she simply pointed to the clause he'd signed before the wedding, his own signature crystal clear. He looked at me then, really looked at me, searching for the woman he used to manipulate so easily. But I wasn't there anymore. I nodded once, slow and deliberate, letting him know this was happening, with or without his dignity intact. He finally grabbed the pen, but not before muttering that I was doing this out of spite, that I was destroying everything we built just to punish him. His voice shook, not with sadness, but with fear. Real fear. The kind that comes when a man realizes the control he thought he had was nothing but an illusion. He signed the documents with jerky, angry strokes, each letter a confession he could never take back. Watching him do it, knowing he was handing me everything he once bragged about providing, felt like reclaiming every piece of myself he'd chipped away. When he pushed the pen back across the table, he leaned forward and said he hoped I was happy now, that I'd won. But the truth was, this wasn't about winning. It was about surviving. It was about choosing myself, and choosing the tiny life growing inside me, over a man who had never once chosen me when it mattered. I gathered the papers quietly while Marissa confirmed the legal process moving forward. He kept talking, kept rambling, saying I was heartless for ending things so coldly, but his voice barely registered anymore. And then, right as he stood up, ready to storm out and rewrite the story in his head however he pleased, I stopped him with a single sentence. I told him there was one more thing he needed to know before he walked away. He froze, his back tense, shoulders tight, waiting for whatever bomb he thought I might drop. I watched him turn slowly, eyes narrowed, and in that moment, holding every piece of my future quietly inside me, I knew I was finally ready to tell him the truth he had never earned. When I finally told him I was pregnant, the word hung in the air like a crack of thunder. He didn't react at first, just stared at me, eyes wide, jaw clenched tight. Then his face twisted into something desperate, almost panicked. He said he deserved to know that I was sick for hiding something so important from him. Suddenly, the man who had shoved our marriage into the dirt was trying to claim a stake in a future he'd already set on fire. Watching him scramble for footing was almost unbearable, if I weren't so numb to him by then. He stepped closer, hands trembling, saying he wanted to be involved, that he had a right to be part of his child's life. The entitlement in his voice made my skin crawl. I told him calmly that he'd forfeited every right the moment I found him with another woman in our bed. He argued, saying I was punishing the baby, that my anger was clouding my judgment. But his words felt like static, loud, annoying, meaningless. I touched my stomach gently, and that simple gesture seemed to hit him harder than anything I'd said. Then the begging started. He said he wasn't thinking straight, that he made a mistake, that he could change. He tried everything, pleading, blaming, bargaining, grasping at any thread he could pull. But there was no thread left, no connection, no future that included him. The man standing in front of me wasn't the one I'd married or dreamed about building a family with. He was a stranger who had torn through my heart without hesitation. And now, all he cared about was losing control, not losing me. I told him, as plainly as I could, that the baby wasn't something we were sharing, not emotionally, not legally, not in any version of reality where respect and loyalty mattered. He said I was being cruel, that he would fight for custody. But even that threat sounded empty. He had just signed away every leverage he'd ever had, and deep down he knew it. His eyes kept darting between my face and my stomach, as if he could will himself back into the picture by sheer panic alone. He reached for me then, instinctively, desperately, but I stepped back before he could touch me, I told him he didn't get to lay a hand on me ever again. Not after betraying me in the one place I was supposed to feel safe. Not after throwing my pain back in my face. Not after turning our home into a stage for his lies. He dropped his hand slowly, like it weighed more than his guilt. He said he never meant to hurt me, but the words were thin, flimsy, useless. They slipped right through the cracks he had created. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. For the first time, he seemed to understand that I was truly done, that there was no version of this story where he got a second chance. I told him he needed to leave, and that whatever happened from here on out wouldn't involve him. He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. He just looked at me, really looked at me, as if he finally saw the woman who had stopped waiting for him to change. And as he walked out the door, I felt something heavy lift off my chest, leaving space for the life I was about to build on my own. The house felt impossibly quiet after he left, like it was finally exhaling after holding its breath for too long. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the little pieces of my life that suddenly felt like they belonged only to me. For months, this space had felt heavy, dark, suffocating, filled with tension I couldn't name. Now, it felt like a blank canvas, waiting for something new, something tender. I placed a hand over my stomach again, and the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. Over the next days, I started reclaiming my routines. I made coffee in the mornings without feeling watched or judged. I opened the windows and let the air flow through the house like a cleansing. I started reorganizing the spare room, not because I was ready to decorate yet, but because I needed to clear out the things that reminded me of who we used to be. Every small task felt like stitching myself back together. The pain was still there, yes, but it didn't own me anymore. It didn't define the path I was on. One afternoon, I stood in that spare room holding a tiny onesie I had impulsively bought the day after the hospital visit. Soft and white, with little stars across the front. I laid it gently in the crib, my first real step into motherhood on my own terms. My throat tightened, but this time it wasn't from grief. It was from hope. Pure, quiet hope. I whispered to my baby that we were going to be okay, that I would give them a life filled with love, safety, and peace. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I truly believed it. Months later, when I finally held my baby in my arms, the world felt like it had clicked back into place. The first cry echoed in the delivery room, soft but strong, and something inside me healed in a way I can't quite put into words. I stared at that tiny face, those perfect fingers curling around mine, and all the scars on my heart felt distant. Not erased, but softened. My baby didn't just arrive. They brought light with them. A light that filled every corner of the life I was rebuilding. Home became a sanctuary again. The soft smell of baby lotion, the quiet hum of the rocking chair, the gentle rhythm of new motherhood, it all wrapped around me like a warm blanket. Some nights, when I fed my baby in the stillness of dawn, I'd think back on the path that brought me here. The betrayal still stung, but it no longer defined me. His name didn't echo in my home anymore. He tried reaching out a few times, texts, calls, even an email saying he deserved a chance to be involved. I blocked all of it without a second thought. I learned something through all of this. Sometimes the family you dream of doesn't look like the one you planned. Sometimes it's smaller, quieter, but infinitely stronger. My home isn't broken. It's peaceful. My future isn't uncertain. It's mine. As I watch my baby sleeping, their little chest rising and falling, I know one thing with absolute certainty. I didn't just survive what he did to me. I turned it into the beginning of the life I always deserved. And this time, I'm not sharing it with anyone who hasn't earned the right to be here.